Hello, Hippo Nation. I am Todd Robison. I'm the Communications Director for Hutto ISD, and I'm joined this morning by our Superintendent, Dr. Celina Estrada Thomas, our Assistant Superintendent of School Support, Dr. Robert Sormani, and our Assistant Superintendent of Operations, Mr. Henry Gideon. And I just wanted to have a little interview time with these folks because we are rolling out our 2020 instructional plan. In fact, most of you probably have already received that in email, and maybe you've started browsing through all 10 pages of it and realized that there is a lot of information in there. And one of the things that we realize as district leadership is there's a lot of things that you can read, but there's so much information that we've talked about over the last weeks and months, and hours have gone into this. And so it's really hard to kind of get it all into a 10-page document. And we know there's a lot of questions that you folks have about this and how we have arrived at some of our decisions, and then what are some things that we're going to do going forward. And we just thought it'd be a good idea just to kind of talk about it a little bit and maybe hit some of the things that we think will be highlight points that y'all as our Hippo Nation community parents would have questions about. So we're just going to do this kind of interview style. And of course, we're doing it in the way that we've all gotten used to, which is a Zoom meeting that we can record so that we can all stay physically distanced from each other. We're all in the same room, but we're very spread apart. So this is the best way to do this. So welcome to our panel of experts and leaders within our school district. And Dr. Thomas, I want to start with you. And Dr. Sormani, you can probably follow up Dr. Thomas with this, but first talk just a little bit about how we arrived at this plan. There's a lot of plans out there. School districts are all releasing their plans, and and there's probably no two that are exactly the same. And we will all be the first to admit there's no single one that's going to be perfect in a very imperfect world that we're dealing with right now. But talk a little bit about what went into developing this plan that we will have for Hippo Nation this coming school year.
Well, hello, Hippo Nation. I think when you look at this plan that we are about to unveil today, it's been in the making since April. And the primary driver has been health and safety. Health and safety for our students, health and safety for our staff. There's a huge echo.
I'll get it.
Okay, sorry about that. Just trying to make sure that people who listen to this interview sometime after today are actually able to hear it. And there's an echo that's in the background. So back to the plan. The driver, we know that our curriculum remains the curriculum. There's been no adjustments to it. We are still moving forward with a rigorous curriculum for all students, whether they select to attend school in person or whether they select a remote instructional setting. But our main concern for returning in August was making sure that our buildings and our classrooms were going to be safe for both staff and students, because we know that that's the primary worry and concern that our parents and that our staff have. There's no question that we would love to have 100% of our kids back here in August because we know that we're going to give them the very best educational experience possible. But this COVID-19 pandemic has really thrown a wrench into our normal operations, and we've had to make some huge adjustments in order to make sure that our staff and our students and our families feel safe coming back. I'm going to allow Dr. Sormani to talk about the instructional framework that we've developed for our families coming back in August. But again, I think it's important for our families and our parents to know that we have invested a great deal of money in making sure that every classroom is going to have the proper supplies for the teacher and for the kids to keep the rooms clean and sanitized. We're going to invest a lot of time. We're going to front load at the beginning and really talk about health and safety for us as staff members and for students. Because the only way to beat this pandemic over time, COVID-19 is not going to go away. The only way to beat COVID-19 is to educate ourselves on how to keep our bodies and ourselves safe in the midst of this pandemic. Because after COVID-19, flu season is going to hit. And so we have to continue to be educated and take a lead and take responsibility in keeping ourselves safe. And we have faith in our kids. We know that if we teach them how to keep themselves safe, and that becomes part of our routine and part of how we operate on a normal basis, by the time spring rolls around, we're gonna have this this whole pandemic and the flu season beaten, because we're gonna invest that time in teaching our kids. And you'd be surprised. It's not like we haven't done this before. We have been ahead of cleaning and keeping our kids safe even before COVID-19. Of course, COVID-19 puts in a whole new dimension on how we have to approach safety and health. But we believe, again, that the one way to beat this pandemic is to educate ourselves and educate our students.
Dr. Sormani, I think that one of the things people want to know is when we arrived at the decision to do remote learning and on-campus learning, where we're offering parents the option. There's some districts out there that are also offering hybrid models where you come to school some, maybe do online some. But what ultimately led us to do what we're doing, where we're offering the remote option or the campus option?
Todd, you had your mic off, but I turned mine on, so I hope the question, but I'll repeat the question, asking how we came up with our instructional model compared to others. And I'm sure people are, by this point, are hearing different ideas creep out from different districts around the state about how they're going to do it, and they have different names. I think the important part for us and for everybody to know is we spent some time in the background learning lessons during this past shutdown, and we learned a lot from parents, from students, and from teachers about what works and what doesn't, knowing that we were going to have to make this plan at some point. And so a lot of what we created for the different grade levels and subjects are based on all that feedback we received over the course of the pandemic. For example, we received feedback from parents with younger children that while they need the flexibility, because working with little ones at home, it's not easy, they also are craving those, we call them touch points, where the child has in person, sees their classmates, sees the teacher, gets to interact and have some of that social time with the teacher. So another big thing we learned from our parents and from our students actually is that the high school students really like the flexibility in an online environment as to when they turn in assignments. That was a big deal, and for those students that were successful in online learning, that was one of the key components for those students. We do have students that really need to go to work, and having the flexibility of doing assignments in the afternoon or the evening was helpful to them. So I think what differentiates us from how other people may have arrived at those is the amount of feedback we took in from all different stakeholders in creating our plans at different grade levels and different subjects. While you can't create a plan that can be perfect for all people, I think we create a plan that overall is best for Hippo Nation.
Dr. Thomas, one of the things that we decided when we started looking at the start of school, before we ever even decided if we were going to offer remote or on campus or whatever, is we decided to move the start of school up a week. Speak a little bit about that and why we felt like that was important.
Well, first and foremost, we lost 12 weeks of face-to-face instruction with our students. And while we commend our teachers and we commend our staff for the phenomenal work they did during the closure, having to teach remotely was a whole new environment and approach for us. And so we have concerns about what we were actually able to teach in the last 12 weeks before school was out. The research is out there. The Texas Education Agency has some great data indicating regression lines for students, especially children who were already struggling, children who were already behind. So we know that this spring, despite our best efforts, our kids experience regression. And there are serious holes in the curriculum, some holes that we've got to look at trying to not necessarily fill, but make up for and spiral into what we have to teach this coming year. We looked at the calendar, and one way that we could affect it was to come back 5 days early. The instructional team, along with our teacher leaders, have been working through this summer to make adjustments in the curriculum and determine which areas of the curriculum really need to be revisited. We have to be intentional about what we have to bring in this coming year to make sure that we teach and that we make sure that our children have a lot of these skills or prerequisite skills that build on the next grade level and the high school level for the next course. So we felt that by coming back 5 days early, that would give our teachers enough lead time to start filling in some of those gaps. The additional 5 days also gives us some cushion if we have to have some intermittent closure. As long as we can continue instruction remotely, we won't have to make up those days at the end of May and go into June.
I think some of the things, obviously we learned a lot of things this past spring, and things that we never imagined that we would learn in terms of how we all pull together and make decisions, and Hippo Nation was obviously fantastic in terms of being better together. I think one of the things we learned was dealing with Dr. Sormani on technology, learning through technology, utilizing our Chromebooks. Of course, our technology department was amazing in the distribution of Chromebooks to our students and our parents this spring. One of the decisions that we made, and actually, Mr. Gideon, I'll let you speak to this, but we decided that to start this school year, we thought it'd be a great idea to go ahead and get these Chromebooks in the hands of all of our middle school and high school students. And we've always kind of had this this desire, I think, to be what we call a one-to-one device district, where there was a Chromebook for every single student in our school district. And we made the decision this year, instead of having to go through parents coming and picking up Chromebooks again, in the event of a closure like we had in the spring, that we just want to get them into the hands of especially our middle school and high school students before school ever starts, and then they're going to keep those for the entire school year. Mr. Gideon, speak a little bit to that and kind of what that process looks like, and how we're going to deal with the whole Chromebook thing, because we know that technology and being able to log on to learning away from campus obviously is going to be necessary for our students who choose remote learning. And then in the event of another closure like we had in the spring, our kids that are studying at campus, they're going to need those devices again, like they had this past spring. So Henry, talk just a little bit about that and just what that process looks like for us.
Sure, thanks. The community may remember that in the May of 19 bond, there was a bond proposal to make a financial commitment to technology. For the last couple of years, some of our community, our taxpayers, our parents, and our teachers have been involved in writing a very comprehensive technology plan. And how are we going to grow not only in support of our curriculum instruction, but our technology capacities as we grow as a district? And so the voters and our community came out in support of that particular bond. The 5-year, 10-year master plan for technology was going to roll out in sort of a methodical way. And I guess if there's a silver lining to COVID-19, it pushed us a little bit quicker in our efforts in that regard. One-to-one was always a dream in that plan, and to implement it meant that there's a lot of factors and considerations and variables that we needed to consider. But almost as a result of being forced into a one-to-one scenario with our distributions over the spring so that we could support our families at home, we were able to learn a lot and hopefully better prepare ourselves for that initiative. It just moved it up a little bit. So as Todd was saying, we're going to do one-to-one grades 6 through 12. Parents will receive a lot of communication and have been receiving communication on what that looks like. And then the plan is and these are all Chromebooks, of course, and in our elementary campuses, we will provide sufficient devices per classroom and begin to assign laptops or Chromebooks to grades 3 through 5th or 2nd through 5th, so that in the event we hit some sort of intercessory or intermittent closure, the children will be prepared as they leave that particular day to take their Chromebooks home with them. And then for our smaller grades, we have other plans in place for making sure our parents have devices. Connectivity is also important, so we also were able to secure some hotspots. We realize that in some areas, our families may not have access to reliable internet. Some parents may not have any internet. And so we are looking at a variety of ways that we can ensure that in the event that a family chooses virtual learning and or we end up in an intermittent closure, we can continue instruction virtually and support our families in that regard. Luckily, we live in a fairly robust area of Austin and Central Texas where Wi-Fi and internet capabilities are there. But nevertheless, we want to be sure that connectivity is also a part of that puzzle. And so more to come on that.
One of the things we've been asked by some parents is if my student has their own laptop computer or device, can they use that instead of a Chromebook? And of course, the answer is at home, absolutely. You know, if folks have those things, by all means. But we have to be clear that for those students that are coming to campuses, Chromebooks are the way of the campus. We can't allow, just for security reasons, we can't allow students bringing their own personal devices to use in a classroom at school. So, you know, we hope that everybody will take us up on getting the Chromebooks and having them. Whether they choose to use them at home or use their own device, certainly that's their option. But at school, we want our students all using the Chromebooks. So, Dr. Sormani, let's get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of what this plan looks like. So, you know, one of the things, let's first, I want you, we have it spelled out in the document, but one of the things I want you to first do is define 2 words that are used a lot through this, and they are the words synchronous and asynchronous. Those are things that might be very confusing to people, but you know, kind of like 6 months ago, coronavirus wasn't a word in our vocabulary. Synchronous and asynchronous are going to become words that we're very used to in 2020, 2021. So talk a little bit about those words, what they mean, and then let's talk some about just what the whole remote learning option looks like, and then the on-campus learning option looks like.
So I start off with asynchronous learning basically means a student is doing their learning not necessarily at a exact given point in time. So there's a greater flexibility. Synchronous learning means the student is doing learning at a specific point in time with the teacher and other students. So all the students are together in a class per se. And I think the easiest way for parents to approach this is the Texas Education Agency gave us 2 methods of doing online learning and ensuring that students are learning and getting attendance, being counted present. One way was through asynchronous methods, and one way was through synchronous methods. And I say it that way because you can have a mixed match of asynchronous and synchronous types of learning at any grade level, but we are labeling certain grade levels as asynchronous or synchronous based on how that child's primary way of education is going to be and how that they're going to be counted present for class. And that's important because unlike during the school closure, Texas Education Agency has made both the grading policy and all the truancy and attendance laws in the state in full effect for this next coming school year. And that means that how students get counted present is important because in order to, in the state of Texas, in order to pass a grade level or a course, I should say, you have to be present for 90% of the class days in the entire school year. And with a 180-day school year, that means 18 absences is the max for any reason, excused or unexcused. So to go more in depth, let's talk about asynchronous learning for a moment. The Texas Education Agency said pre-kindergarten through second grade will have to be asynchronous learning. There is no discretion for districts on that for those parents who are opting into online learning. So what that might look like is that a teacher will, through a learning management system like Google Classroom or something called Seesaw, would put out assignments for students to complete. Those assignments may be completed on a daily basis. They may have particular due dates. The teacher will also notify parents that here are the certain points where I'd like to get the whole class together, or maybe an individual student to do a tutoring session with that student. And there will also be times where the student will log into, say, a program like something called RenStar, where the student would practice reading whenever the child and the parent decide they want to sit down and do that. And they would log in 30 or 45 minutes. And so any of those activities that I just described would allow a student to be counted as present for that day, as long as they did it on those, Monday through Friday daily, they could be counted as present. So that's a real broad look at what pre-K through second grade might look like next year. If you move up to third through fifth grade, we have chosen to do a synchronous model, and a lot of that was based on feedback from parents who are really craving for some structure for those grade levels. And what that means is students are going to have a schedule that they're going to follow on a daily basis. That's going to be printed, and much like you would have in a regular elementary school in in-person instruction, you would have, say, English language arts from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, math from 10 to 11, and they would log in with their teacher, and the teacher would teach a lesson. And the students would then be given an assignment to do, and the teacher would be sitting there online watching them do their lesson, maybe give feedback if they see the student doing something incorrectly, or maybe the student asks a question. Additionally, the teacher may assign groups to work together while everybody's online. So certain students might be communicating with each other, being monitored by the teacher to make sure it's all appropriate and on topic. That's what synchronous looks like. In addition to that synchronous learning, the teacher may assign homework just like you would have in a regular school day. So outside that virtual classroom, students might be picking a time later on at 4 o'clock to do some homework and submit that electronically to the teacher at a different point. 6th through 8th grade, it's going to be similar. That's a synchronous learning environment. Once again, educators especially have said that 6th through 8th graders struggle without structure. And so we're going to give them a schedule that they're going to go through, just like I had described. They're going to have a homework just like other students. The only difference to elementary is, like a normal school day, they will have multiple teachers. So they'll log into English language arts class, meet with an ELA teacher. Then they'll log off when that class is over, log into their social studies class at a different time. And eventually they'll go through ELA, math, social studies, and science for the day, and that will help them be counted. That will have them counted as present. Now, in synchronous learning, one of the challenges we face is, don't forget, we have students in school, in present during the day. So our elective teachers are going to be teaching all day long, working with students in person. So what we're doing right now is we're contracting with teachers to create lessons modules so that students, say in Art 1 or theater, if they're in those electives and want to continue those electives, although they're online learning, will have access to those learning modules. And so it'll be really a self-paced kind of learning process for students and electives if they're in an online learning environment. And then finally, the high school, grades 9 through 12. It was interesting, tackling the high school because every class counts in the high school because you need the credits in order to graduate. People don't realize, but a lot of electives that we offer in Hutto ISD are not required by the state in pre-K through 8th grade. However, all the electives we're offering are required to graduate in high school. And so there are different rules that apply. And of course, we have a different approach to ensure that our kids are successful. And it also changes depending on the grade level. For example, one of the things we learned is in the online learning environment we're in, 9th graders struggled probably more than any other grade level as far as logging in on a regular basis and completing assignments. They just, and I had a 9th grader also, by the way, and it doesn't have anything to do with malintent. They just don't think about school unless they know they have to be there. And so on the flip side of that, though, is we found that a lot of the older students worked really well in an online environment, given flexibility to complete assignments at different times. So what we've chosen is to have an asynchronous model. However, you'll find at certain subjects and grade levels, there will be some required times when students are going to need to log in with their class and meet with their teacher. And a lot of that's going to come out in the details as the high school begins to develop those models with their teachers. I'm going to give an example. Algebra 1 is probably one where students are going to have a regular time which they're going to meet with their teacher and their other students, while also completing assignments outside that regular class time. We found Algebra 1 is just one that the freshmen struggled in during online environment. So those are some of the ways we're going to approach this. I know that there's a lot more details that go with running a large 6A high school, but as we begin to flesh those out, we'll begin to communicate those as well.
What are some things that parents are going to think about or need to think about, particularly for the middle school and high school students who want to be in band or athletics, things like that, but they want to choose the remote learning? It would seem some of those things maybe, I'm not sure, can you do band remotely? Can you do art remotely? Can you do dance remotely? I don't know. So speak a little bit to that.
Yes and no. So let me try to tackle this in a couple of different ways. The first is in online environment during the regular school day. Everybody needs to remember that all these teachers have students in front of them in the building. Except for teachers, I'm able to do online learning only. The problem at the high school level with electives is that there aren't enough elective teachers to go around to have both online teachers and in-person teachers. And one of the things that we decided upon early on in talking with teachers, it's going to be way too hard to ask a teacher to try to do online learning and in-person learning at the exact same time. Neither groups of students are going to get a really robust curriculum and instruction if we try to ask teachers to do that. So what we've developed is for the lower grade levels, students are going to be able to participate online only through these modules. So for example, dance. You may not have the dance teacher there in front of you on the screen instructing you directly, but the dance teacher might be able to provide some lessons online. Now, depending on how many students opt online and how many students are going to be in person will determine a lot about how much I can give online learning. So, for example, if we have very few students that are opting to online learning, I probably am going to have to limit what elective choices those students have. And we're certainly going to make sure that they get all the requirements they need to graduate and to move to the next grade level, but it's all economy of scale. Now, if I have 50% of the district wants to opt online, I will have more teachers to work with to provide choices for students in an online environment. So that's all dependent on how parents are opting in. Now, the other piece I want to talk about, well, one other thing is there are going to be some exceptions. As we go into this environment, I recognize, and I've already heard, there are some teachers who think they can do both. I'm not going to ask them to do that, but if they think they can handle both, I'm not going to stop them. And so there might be some individual cases where we might be able to work something out. The example I've been using is, I don't know how you do welding, teach how to teach welding online. I just can't imagine how you can do it. But just because I can't imagine it doesn't mean somebody might come up with a great idea of how to do this, and we'll figure it out. So I don't want to completely shut the door on some of these ideas, because in these types of environments, innovation happens. The other part I want to talk about, though, is outside the normal school day. So remember, band has marching before school, football has football practice before school, and the UIL, the governing body for these types of activities, has not given us guidance at this time of this recording, so we don't know what their rules are going to be. Our philosophy at this moment is that if a student is participating in online learning and completing their assignments, we don't see a reason why they shouldn't be able to participate in extracurriculars outside the school day. Now, as far as going to quote unquote band class and athletics periods during the school day, if you're opted into online learning, you've got to follow your online learning schedule, and that will preclude you from participating during the day to those classes. But outside, I don't have issue with students. In fact, I want to encourage that. If those parents feel safe enough to send their students to those practices, depending on what UIL tells us as far as how we can safely have these practices, if at all.
Mr. Gideon, I know as parents look to making their choice on whether their students are going to be remote or they're going to be on campus, when they consider on campus, obviously one of the first things they want to know and think about is what are we doing? What is Hutto ISD doing to make the on-campus experience safe as possible, right? I mean, we all know this virus is kind of crazy, but there are mitigating steps that everybody can take. What are some things that we're doing as a school district to create campus environments that are as safe as possible?
Sure, and that's absolutely understandable. Luckily, public schools in Texas have been going on 150 years, and in the course of that time frame, schools have had to deal with health and safety concerns all throughout the course of our history. And so in saying that, we have robust standard response protocols in place that are specifically geared towards communicable disease, infectious disease. And so we're not having to really reinvent the wheel, but there are some things about COVID that we want to focus in on in terms of how we're going to keep the instructional environment safe and keep our students and our staff safe. Our Director of Health and Safety, Kendra Estes, our Head of Custodians, Mr. Peter Gonzalez, have worked very, very closely through the years, as is the case in many districts across the state. And it's all about tracking and keeping a handle on the population. And as Dr. Thomas said earlier, once we get school going and we're focusing on COVID, the next thing you know, the flu season is going to be around, or there might be a little staph infection that pops up. These kinds of things happen in our schools. The key is, you heard some new terminology that Dr. Sormani went over with synchronous, asynchronous. There's new nomenclature in health and safety, contact tracing. We have always tracked through our nurses, and we have some outstanding nurses in our district and our admin, students and illnesses, and we have protocols in place to go in and ensure that we are mitigating and tackling any of the concerns that are related to that. What I would say to the public is there's a lot of guidance from many circles, and at times it can be very confusing. And Kendra has given us, based on TEA and CDC guidelines, 4 places to hang our hats on. And I want to be very careful. Normally I would fly off the cuff here and answer those questions. So I'm going to read a couple of things for the public. These will be provided to you as well. But the 4 areas we want to focus in on so that we're consistent in Hutto, so that all districts are consistent throughout the state. So there's some certainty and consistency in how we're approaching health and safety. Notification is very, very important. That's number 1. Requirements for our parents and for the public to see notices often and in person and present at all times. There are going to be some preventative practices in place that will prevent the virus from entering the instructional environment. And we will have response mechanisms, practices to respond to lab confirmed cases in our schools. And then, of course, mitigation practices in case we do have a spread at the school. But it's going to come down to a lot of things you're hearing in the public today. There are going to be appropriate times in which we're going to require masks. We're going to make personal protective equipment available to our staff. We will use appropriate quaternary style cleaners, electrostatic systems, things that were already in place previous. There will be some social distancing, and to the extent what you're hearing generally from our public officials as we kind of creep open as a nation, or we have to kind of pull it back a little bit, you're going to see us kind of mirror that as we go along. But it's going to be a little different. Where before, for example, riding school buses, we are able in some elementary runs to put 2 to 3 kids to a seat. We may have to develop routes in which only 2 to a seat on those buses as they come to school will be allowed. And then we'll be prepared to cut that back or carve that back even further depending on the circumstances. And in that case, we will also require parents to provide masks for their kids when they get on the bus, because a bus environment, unlike a classroom or a cafeteria, is a little tighter, a little more confined. Our bus drivers will also be provided personal protective equipment, and every day buses are sanitized and cleaned, and we will stay on top of that as we bring these youngsters to school. And as you arrive to school, we're going to change the receiving mechanism a little bit so that we're not gathering like we might do under normal circumstances, and we're going to quickly receive our children and then disseminate them into the school. Again, using some of the social distancing guidelines that most of us are familiar with now, and in some places give some more acute direction as to what we want to do to mitigate the spread of disease. But all in all, I have full faith and confidence in Mr. Gonzalez and his outstanding custodians, our health and safety team led by Kendra Estes. But it's going to take the partnership of our teachers and us providing additional chemicals that are safe to use in the schools, our students learning some sanitation and some hygiene early, probably the first day of school. They'll hear quite a bit of that. It's going to require the cooperation of our parents as well. We're going to call on our parents to be sure that they're the first point of decision making. Is your child feeling ill that morning? Does your child have any symptoms that you would be concerned with? And holding that child back until you're able to verify with your own physician whether your student is safe to go to school or not. Same thing with our staff, making sure our staff are doing their own personal checks as to the list of symptoms that we know are available to us insofar as the COVID spread. But I am confident going into the school year that we can maintain safe environments, and we really, really want to welcome our students back. I think it's important for us to get school open, and as parents are able to make that decision with their students, just know that Hippo Nation's in good hands. We got a lot of great people working behind the scenes to make it happen.
Thanks, Henry. Dr. Thomas, I think one of the things Henry said that to me is so critical as we talk about students coming back to campus and those parents who are going to send their students back to campus. And you as a former high school principal certainly can relate to this, is we just cannot have students that are sick coming to school. And it starts at the home, right? And from elementary all the way up. those parents, and a lot of times high school kids might not tell their parents if they're not feeling well, but it's going to be very important for these parents to let their kids know, you have to tell us if you're having any kind of symptoms, and then those parents have to keep their kids home. I mean, that's a huge responsibility on parents. And I know in the past, parents maybe try to fudge that a little bit because they have to go to work. You know, he's got a little bit of a fever, but yeah, I think he's okay. Just has a little stomach ache or whatever. We can't mess around with this COVID thing. And if anybody is anywhere close to sick, the parents have to keep them home.
I guess the health and safety speaks to the need for that school to home partnership. And that begins every single day with self-screening. We're going to ask our teachers to self-screen every morning. We want our families to self-screen themselves, because we're sure that many of them have to go to work themselves, but more importantly, screen the children. That's where health and safety begins. We are not going to be taking people's temperature when they walk into the buildings. We made that decision again in coordination with Mrs. Estes, our Director of Health and Safety, taking temperatures for asymptomatic folks is not going to do us any good, but we do expect that screening to take place at home. And even when the children enter our building, our teachers will continue to monitor the children when they're in their classrooms. So if anyone is exhibiting symptoms or starts feeling ill, they will immediately be referred to our school nurses for further screening. But a couple of things for our parents that children and students are going to need coming into the school year as far as supplies. While we will have masks at school and on school buses, there's no possible way for us to provide 8,200 masks a day for 180 days in the school year. We're going to ask parents to please this summer invest in several masks for their students. Students will be required to wear masks when they load school buses. They'll be required to wear masks as they enter the school building and anytime that they're in transition. Once they get into classrooms where we can safely spread them out, then they can remove their masks. Teachers will develop routines and protocols and expectations for how the students will work in a classroom. If the students are asked to work in small groups, obviously we will ask them to put their masks back on because they can't be safely separated. But again, all those routines and expectations will be taught in the classroom. Once a child leaves the classroom, they'll be expected to put on their masks again. So will the adults. Anytime that we're in contact with other students or other human beings, we will wear our masks. And we will continue to do that, again, in accordance with local guidelines, with COVID cases and what's happening in our immediate area. Right now, as we speak on July 2nd, obviously, COVID cases are extremely high, and we probably expect those numbers to stay consistent through the summer until they slowly stop dropping back down. But the only way they're going to drop down is by all of us doing our part. And in schools, we're going to do our part to keep those COVID exposures and cases down. We're in the process of developing, and I think one of the big questions that parents may have, so Dr. Thomas, Dr. Sormani, or Mr. Christian, or any principal out there, what are going to be the trigger points when you decide to close a classroom or to close down a building, or what are the trigger points when you're going to close down the whole district? And those are still some unknown markers. By the time school starts, trust me, we will definitely have those markers clearly in place. We do know right now that in a classroom, if the teacher or any student tests positive for COVID, that classroom will be closed. Everybody goes home for 14 days, but instruction continues. So if you're in an in-person setting and we have to close that particular classroom, It doesn't mean that learning stops. We take our Chromebook home, and the teacher continues instruction from a remote setting until it's safe to come back. So we're working through all those particular details, again, that concern parents when kids are coming to school. But know that we are working behind the scenes to try and address all of those little unknowns that we have at this point. Two things that we can assure our families is that robust, rigorous instruction will continue, whether you're at home or you're in a person. That we can't continue to have gaps exist or for us to lag behind with what needs to happen with our education.
And I think it's important that we say too that, you know, we understand there are lots of opinions about things like masks and physical distancing, just lots of opinions in general just about coronavirus. We're not, any decision we make is not a political decision.
Not at all.
We have 1,200 staff members in our school district, and a lot of them probably don't like wearing masks, and a lot of them do. And at the end of the day, any decision that we make is going to be what we feel is in the best interest. We're going to err on the side of protecting our kids and protecting our staff. And, you know, there might be a lot of us that don't enjoy wearing masks. But right now, the general consensus is that they have some benefit. And so we need to err on the side of protecting our kids and our staff. Speaking of staff, I want you to talk just a little bit about, speak to our staff members. Like I said, we have 1,200 staff members out there. Speak to our staff members, not just our teachers, but to our other staff members of what we as a district are committed to doing to keeping them as safe as possible.
I think first and foremost, teachers and any other staff member in our buildings should not have to worry about spending extra money on cleaning supplies or sanitation supplies. We were intentional this summer as we created our budgets. We are ordering enough sanitation supplies to equip every classroom and every building. Upon entry, everyone will be required to sanitize. For the first 12 weeks of schools, our school buildings will essentially be on lockout. And what that means is that we are not going to allow any visitors or anyone from the outside to come into our buildings. Unless, of course, there's an emergency. We'll work with those particular cases. But as far as visitation, folks coming in to have lunch with their students or deliver lunch, anything like that, to our parents out there, just work with us. Know that we're trying to keep our campuses and our staff minimize those outside exposures as much as possible. So we are in the process of creating those lockdown mechanisms. I'm going to take a pause right here. I need to step away for a second.
Get a drink of water.
Yes, I do.
So as we begin to wrap this up, one of the things I want to encourage you as parents to know is that we will continue to communicate with you as we did in the spring. We found that it was, and we heard feedback from you, that the weekly parent update that we sent out was effective. So we certainly will continue doing that. We will probably start that weekly parent communication in late July, probably continuing to do it on a Tuesday each week. But we will certainly do that. Hopefully we will get into a routine where those updates will be fairly short. And just have little nuggets. But we all know, we saw it in the spring and we've seen it this summer, things change rapidly. Things change sometimes daily, sometimes even hourly. But we will continue to send those communications out to you each week via email. So certainly want to encourage you, make sure your email addresses are updated in Skyward. Make sure your phone numbers are updated in Skyward. Make sure all of your contact information is current. Because that's how we're going to communicate with you. We're going to communicate with you through email, obviously on our social media channels, our Facebook page, our Twitter, and then all of our schools also have their own pages where they do that. And then also we will continue our special COVID web page that we set up in the spring. We will continue to update that. Those letters that we send out weekly get updated to that, so you can always go back and find those there, as well as other information in terms of instruction or other just things that are important to keep on a continual basis. We know there's going to be questions, no doubt. There's going to be a lot of questions. There's probably going to be a lot of questions after you start looking through this through the document that we're sending out. We still have that special email that we set up in the spring that's coronavirus@huttoisd.net. Please use that for anything that is related to the situation that we're in. If you have other, special campus related questions or whatever, you can always email your principal, email your campus. But coronavirus, if it's something that's related to the pandemic situation, if it's related to how we're doing remote learning or things like that, you can send that to us, and we'll be sure it gets sent on to the right person. Keep watching your emails. Again, we will be off. Our district will be closed the week of July 6th. We always close a week for the 4th of July. 4th falls on a Saturday this year, so we are closing the week afterwards. So you might get this document and you might have questions and you're going to start sending emails. Just know that this next week, we won't be able to necessarily respond to those, but we will the following week. So we're probably going to all come back from vacations and have a lot of questions to answer. But we're hoping that this video helps a little bit. We'll certainly, we were able to address some things that might be running through your head as you review the document. So I'll give our leaders one last chance. Dr. Sormani, is there anything that you would like to add before we close?
No, just stay safe and get ready for some education and HIPAA Nation.
Mr. Gideon?
We really missed the students, and we want to see them back. And even if those families that choose the virtual option, possibly, we want you to know that this is what we do. We're here to serve this community, serve our kids, and your kids are going to be in good hands, whether they're receiving instruction online or in person. And but we need that partnership. We need you to help us be that three-legged stool in order for students to be successful, the parent, the student, and our district. So we look forward to seeing your kids soon.
And Dr. Thomas, I'll kind of let you give the last word before I say goodbye, but I do want to say there's lots of questions already. Obviously, as we get close to the fall in Texas, people want to know, what about high school football? What about Friday nights? And so, you're on calls almost daily with the commissioner, with other superintendents, and you certainly we all have our ears to the to what's going on. But what's the latest on high school football in Texas for the fall?
Oh my gosh, if I knew the answer to that question, I would sell it. But obviously, we are still awaiting. Our plan, of course, we committed to sending out an instructional plan, a safety plan by today, July 2nd. Even as we hit the send button, the commissioner is expected to speak today. There was a University Interscholastic League, UIL, meeting and the commissioner yesterday. We don't know if they've actually developed some guidelines that they're going to send school districts or not. So even though we're going to send out this plan, our families and community needs to know that it is definitely a solid draft. It is not final. I imagine that in the next 4 weeks, we're going to continue to get updates. We developed our own health and safety guidelines based on the most current information that we had. Depending on what the state may mandate or further require of us, we may have to make adjustments. And so we ask for patience and just really, we ask for patience, and we ask that our families, and then we ask for our parents, to staff members especially, to stay up with our communications and to stay on top of the dates that we send information out on, because this is an ongoing fluid situation. We are planning for the best possible scenario on August 11th. Just to reiterate what Mr. Gideon was saying, we love our students. We would want nothing more than to have 100% of them back. But we also respect our families' choice to choose whether they want to send them back or whether they want to continue to learn remotely. Either way, all of our students are our hippos. We're going to love them and take care of them in whatever setting a family chooses. We're here, we're committed to our health and safety first and foremost for our families. We know that if you don't feel safe, you're not going to be able to learn. So we're making that our primary, our priority as we look to August 11th and having everyone back remotely or in person.
And just one last thing, so we will have a survey that will go out next Monday. It'll be scheduled, even though we'll be on vacation, the survey will be scheduled to hit your mailboxes, your email boxes sometime on Monday the 6th. And what that survey is simply going to ask you is, do you choose to have your children learn remotely or on campus? And you have a couple of weeks to think about that. We're not asking you for you to make an immediate decision, but certainly we want you to be able to review the document that we're sending out, review the plan, discuss it with your family, and then we will need those responses. I think that survey will close on July the 19th. Is when we will tally all the responses, and then Dr. Sormani will be able to start working with principals to plan what schedules are going to look like, what teachers are going to look like in terms of who's teaching remotely and who's teaching classroom full of students. But we appreciate you as parents. Y'all are great partners with us. We appreciate your patience and your grace. Obviously, we're all going through something that's brand new. You know, we learned a lot in the spring, but now we're about to try to start a school year in a whole different way from what we've ever started before. So, you know, we need grace and we need patience, and we need your understanding that everything we do is based on, and every decision we make is based off of the information that we have currently. So, you know, are we going to make a mistake somewhere along the way? Almost certainly we will, but we will learn from that, just like we learned a lot from this spring. But, you know, like the others have said, we miss our kids. We want them back. We want this virus gone. We want to get back to what normal school looks like here in Hippo Nation. If you have questions, email us. Check our website, and we will be in touch throughout the rest of the summer. We hope you enjoy what time you have left of the summer and are able to have some good family time or relaxation. But we'll be anxious to get school started on August the 11th. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon.